The morning sunlight spilled through the dusty cafe windows in thin, uneven stripes, lighting up motes of flour and steam drifting from the kitchen like slow-moving stars. Inside the half-forgotten little place, tucked between a bookshop and a shuttered tailor shop, a 22-year-old waitress named Liana tried to steady her trembling hands as she adjusted the worn apron around her waist. She had barely slept. Again. Between her mother's medical bills, overdue rent, and her younger brother's school fees, the weight on her shoulders felt heavier than any tray she had ever carried. Yet she forced herself into motion, greeting customers with a soft smile that rarely reached her exhausted eyes. The cafe was her battlefield, her sanctuary, and her burden all at once, and every day she arrived hoping it would finally be the one that changed her life, only to find herself still struggling against the same cold tide of circumstance. The morning crowd came and went, leaving behind half-empty cups, greasy plates, and the faint hum of conversations fading into the street. Liana worked quickly, sweeping through the tables with a quiet efficiency that seemed almost too gentle for the chaos around her. She took order after order, quietly absorbing the frustration of rushed office workers and the impatience of tourists who barely acknowledged her existence. But through it all, she held on to a strange, persistent belief that life could shift in a single unexpected moment, even if she had no proof of it yet. She had whispered that belief to herself for years, repeating it like a prayer every time the world seemed to tighten around her throat. She didn't know why she kept believing. She just did. It was nearly noon when the bell above the door chimed again, cutting through the clatter of dishes. A tall man walked in, dressed in simple traveling clothes, the kind that seemed too ordinary for someone who moved with the confidence of a person who never had to glance at prices. He carried a leather-bound notebook and a camera slung loosely over his shoulder. His hair was slightly windblown, as if he had walked a long distance through the city's narrow alleyways. No one in the cafe recognized him, though people would have fallen silent if they knew the truth. He was Adrian Malenkov, a reclusive billionaire known not only for his vast business empire but also for his passion for languages and cultures. Yet today, he moved with deliberate anonymity, seeking something he couldn't buy: authenticity. Liana approached him like she approached every customer, politely, calmly, hiding the storm beneath her ribs. She couldn't have known that he had already noticed the way she had steadied a wobbling table for an elderly couple earlier, or the way she remembered every regular's preference despite her exhaustion. Adrian had spent years traveling the world, observing people quietly, and he had developed an unusual habit of testing character not through wealth or influence, but through language. He believed that language revealed the heart. Most people, he had found, hid behind the easy shields of common words. But when confronted with something rare, unexpected, or historic, their true selves emerged. He studied the menu for a moment, then wrote something in his notebook and slid it toward her just as she reached the table. On the page was a sentence written in Ainu, one of the rarest languages on Earth, spoken by barely a handful of people from an indigenous group of northern Japan. It was a simple phrase, but nearly impossible to recognize unless someone had studied deeply or had a personal connection to it. He wanted to see her reaction, not to mock her, but to understand her. He expected confusion, maybe laughter, maybe annoyance. Instead, the entire cafe paused as Liana stared at the sentence, her breath catching in her throat. Memories washed over her like a sudden tide. Her father, a quiet linguist who had died when she was 16, used to spend long nights teaching her fragments of endangered languages, telling her each one carried the heartbeat of a people who refused to be forgotten. Ainu had been his favorite. He used to sit with her on the balcony, reciting old words under the moonlight, believing that preserving a language was like preserving a soul. Liana blinked back sudden tears as her finger hovered over the notebook. She recognized the sentence at once. It was the same phrase her father used to whisper, Kamui chepesui carpe, meaning, what has the divine whale gifted you today? It was a poetic way of asking, how is life treating you? Her father had explained that the phrase came from stories of whales, creatures seen as sacred, generous, wise. She felt something fragile break open inside her, and without hesitation she responded. But not in words. She wrote back in the same language, her letters steady and elegant despite her shaking hands. She wrote that the day had been hard, but she was trying to remain hopeful, honoring what her father had taught her. The moment she pushed the notebook back to him, the cafe fell into an eerie silence, as if the air itself held its breath. If you're still watching, take a moment to hit the like button, because what happens next changes everything for Liana. Adrian's eyebrows lifted, not with arrogance, but with awe. In all his travels, only a few scholars had recognized the language, and none had responded with such intimate understanding. He felt something shift inside him, a quiet realization that this moment was not a test anymore. It was a connection. He wrote another line, this one more complex, speaking of resilience, hardship, and unseen battles. And to his astonishment, she answered again, fluently, instinctively, as if she were speaking from a hidden well of stories and memories. People in nearby tables leaned in, whispering, watching the unlikely exchange unfold like an unscripted film. Some thought it was a joke. Others sensed something sacred. As Adrian learned more about her father, her dreams, her struggles, and the weight of responsibility she carried, he felt an unfamiliar emotion pulse through him, admiration. For years he had been surrounded by people who chased his wealth, but not his humanity. Yet here, in this small, imperfect cafe, he had found a young woman whose spirit was stronger than any fortune. She wasn't just surviving. She was carrying her father's legacy with a bravery she herself didn't recognize. Liana, unaware of who he truly was, felt strangely safe, sharing fragments of her past with him through their written exchange. She had never told anyone about the balcony lessons, or how she whispered endangered words to herself whenever life felt too heavy. She felt seen in a way she hadn't felt in years. For a moment, she forgot the bills, the stress, the exhaustion. She was simply a daughter remembering her father, speaking a language meant to be kept alive. Adrian closed his notebook gently and rose from the table, surprising her. He asked for the bill with a subtle gesture, and she hurried to bring it, apologizing under her breath for the handwritten numbers and faded paper. She expected him to pay and disappear like any passing tourist, but instead he paused before placing the money down. He pulled out a small card from his pocket and left it under the receipt, then gave her a brief nod of respect before walking out. She didn't even notice the amount he left as a tip until he was gone. When she lifted the receipt, her breath hitched violently. It wasn't money. It was a donation confirmation. The debt for her mother's hospital bills, every last cent, had been paid in full. Her fingers went numb, her knees nearly buckled. Panic, disbelief, relief, and overwhelming gratitude crashed through her all at once. She stumbled after him, pushing through the cafe door only to find the street empty. He had vanished. Not wanting to cry in public, she clutched the card he had left behind, a simple business card with his name embossed in gold. Only then did she realize who he was. She had seen the name in headlines. She stared at it as if it were impossible. Why her? Why today? She continued trembling long after she returned inside, clutching the card like a lifeline. Word spread quickly. Within hours, the cafe buzzed with talk of what had happened. By evening, Liana received a call from one of Adrian's assistants inviting her to a cultural preservation project he funded, an international initiative dedicated to saving endangered languages. They had seen her fluency, her emotional connection, her story. They wanted her to help document, teach, and research languages the world was on the verge of forgetting. It was everything her father had dreamed of doing, and everything she never believed she would have a chance to pursue. That night, after the cafe closed, Leon,